One of the things I've been amusing myself with during lockdown, here I am speaking in November of 2020, is contriving, perhaps thinking up very carefully considered learning models. And the latest learning model I've come up with is HELP, which seems quite resonant, particularly at the present time. So I'm serious about this. I think about learning a lot, and I think about ways in which I can crystallize my thoughts and make them accessible. So let me do an overview of what HELP is all about, HELP, or stand for something, and then I'll go to them in a bit more depth. So here comes the overview. First one of the four elements is humility. The need to recognize that you don't know it all, basically. Secondly, energy. Oh, yes, there's something that I'm lacking in most of the time. I can't speak for everyone else. But energy, learning doesn't come cheap and requires effort. Long term, it's long term that we should expect to see returns, if anything, from learning. We don't expect too much immediately. And practice. Putting things into practice is the only evidence that learning's happened. So that's where I go. Let's see where I go with this. So let's start with humility, something which I certainly could do with a bit more of myself, if I'm perfectly honest. Humility in the context of learning, for me, is all about recognizing that, well, we don't know it all about anything, no matter how expert we consider ourselves to be. That expertise is always a work in progress. And for me, learners without humility are not skilled learners. Learners without humility feel they know more than they do. It blocks them off and obstructs further learning to happen. And if you can't accept that you're somebody who needs to know more about just about everything, then you're not in the best position to learn. It's such an obvious, self-evident thing to say. And it's one of the things that in my own, if I call it a career that now spans 39 years in the learning industry, it's one of the things I think in retrospect that I've seen as a major barrier to a lot of people learning whatever it is in whatever context. The thought that, oh, well, I'm all right at this. I don't need to learn any more on this. I know this already. I've heard this before. It gets in the way. So humility is required as a platform from which to learn. Energy. Learning's not an easy thing to do a lot of the time. Learning that comes easily, quite likely, is going to be learning that has less value than the true learning that comes from needing to dig a bit deeper, to persist with something that wasn't immediately a payoff, to find in the midst of all sorts of other priorities the energy required to commit to learning whatever it is and in whatever context, because it takes an effort that sometimes stops us learning what we could because we don't look deeply enough and we can't be bothered. So learning needs energy, personal energy. It comes from us, typically. It's largely driven by us. So it's all what we find within ourselves. And if we can't find that energy, then we're only looking for the easy learning. Easy learning doesn't have the best payoffs. Long term, not short term. An awful lot of people, an awful lot of organizations seem to have developed a culture of look for as an immediate a payoff as you possibly can. Again, that's quite likely to be an indication of low value learning. High value learning is something which requires energy, as I said, and that energy needs to be a long-term strategy. What I mean by long-term could be a month instead of a day. It could mean 6 months instead of one. It could mean 3 years instead of 1 year. It helps to have a realistic idea of what you're taking on. We don't want to be surprised by something needing 6 weeks that we thought could be done in 3 hours. So we ought to have realistic ideas of the nature of the challenge ahead of ourselves and be realistic about the returns that we can expect and over what time. I think for me, there's a correlation between the effort and the time required to genuinely get on top of a piece of learning and how long it takes. It's rare I find that high value learning, learning which is sustainable, learning which stays with you, learning you use for many years, is something which you learned in 5 minutes. It's the learning I've found that is attritional, which takes a lot more time than many people are prepared to put in, that give me the returns, the models I use, the thoughts I get, the mental models, the reading that I do gives me learning which has got a deeper reach and stays with me longer. So I think there is, for me at least, a definite correlation between the effort we put in, the length of time something takes that is important, and how long that takes. Practice. Practice is, for me, a crucial indication of learning. Learning isn't only knowledge. Knowledge has a lot of value. Learning goes beyond knowledge. Knowing things is important. Knowing things is critical. Learning is different to knowing things. Can be part of the same stream, can be distinct and different. You kind of need to know things in order to learn. But a lot of people, for me, stop at, and if I talk personally, it's true of me too, stop at knowing. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I read that, so I know it. You might know it, but have you put it into practice? Have you implemented that learning? Have you applied that learning? So for me, practice and all that goes with that, the frustration, the confusion, the disappointment, the irritation, getting beyond those sorts of obstacles are important. And that's again where we come back to energy and we go back to thinking long term, because putting learning into practice is rarely easy. The opportunities don't always present themselves as readily as we might like. We might not get the support from others that we might look for. It could take more time. We might not see an immediate payoff. There are all sorts of reasons why when we put learning into practice, it can be a frustrating experience. But learning requires practice, and learning, which for me is a long-term change in behavior brought about by an experience, is only evident when we've applied that knowledge, that new insight. So practice is critically important. So there you go. It's over to you if you've stuck with me for these 8 minutes or so up to now. Humility, energy, long-term perspective, practice. So what now? What are you going to do about it? Are you going to use these thoughts to make your own learning journey, excuse me, more effective, more efficient, more worthwhile? I hope so.